It's 5:49 on the 15th of May 2025. Welcome, loyal viewers, I guess. No one's gonna watch these. It's more of a, those self-help apps that people have, like where it reminds them to drink water and not let how awful the world is sometimes get on them. Yeah, I don't really use them either. Except for one, but that's only because somebody got me on its whole thing. This is here for me. If in a million years and these still exist somewhere, people want to drag me through the mud using them, don't. It was worth a try. Now it's just to get my thoughts straight on this. I'm trying to dedicate an hour, at least a week, to like sitting down and writing. To that end, I want to do at least one of these once a week. You can tell it wasn't scripted. All the constant asides and the lack of anything having been done yet. And my office fan is broken, so it's a little warm. I've got the sun beating on the window. It could be worse. Anyway, I'm not really sure what I'm working on right now, just because, yes, I have a 67-page work Bible. It's not the only one. This other one for a character-specific story from that same thing is 21 pages, and there's a bunch of other stuff somewhere. Ground rules. Because these are from me. I don't really benefit from not being honest. I know that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't benefit me to not be clear with my reasoning for any given character. And I guess first and foremost, everything here is me. That's one thing that my dear assistant and I nailed down a few years ago. Regardless, we were chatting, points out that each character is something of me in there. Here, I actually have it written down. It's the guiding principles section of my development document, the Story Bible, if you want to call it that. A brief on all characters as a whole. Every original character here is, in one sense or another, me. They're an expression of a part of me or desire of mine or an ideal to be reached for. No one of them is the full and complete picture. Not sure when this idea crept in, but it was probably there all along. In fact, I wonder if I have the original story documents handy. welcome to my 3-inch 3-ring binder of all of the original, or most of the original, okay, it's either my floors or this chair that are awful. I really hope it's not the... Actually, I really hope it's neither, come to think of it. Anyway. Yeah, so all of the original story documents, these... Is this... suffice it to say that all of this dates back to my... Well, not all of it, obviously, but the first thing I wrote was my second year at Stetson, the second year in university. And I don't know what I was doing that I was... Where is that paper? That I was sitting there going, what creative thing do I want to do today? I don't have the original paper. It's not in any of these. I think I know where it is, though. I so knew where it is. So yeah, literally my initial character document was a sheet of loose leaf that I had ripped out of a binder. I can see the bits that are ripped. And I had this very clear-ish idea of a few character archetypes. Actually, I may as well just go into it, because literally I wrote this when I was... would have been early that year, so I was probably 19 at the time. Oh my god, that was 12 years ago. No, I can't do math. 14 years ago. I promise I'm an adult and I can do arithmetic without having to count on my fingers. Anyway, who was here to start with? Fairy Blue was here, literally labeled. These are labeled in order, because I wrote around the page when I started running out of room. It was a very one-page document of the original cast, so to speak. Anyway, Fairy Blue is literally the first. I think I got the name from, and I don't remember if it was Paper Moon. It was one of the endings for Soul Eater. I'm an anime nerd, who knew? And it just rang, like it worked. So I said, okay, who is Fairy Blue? There's not a lot here. Literally, she's a woman, dark hair, very like navy blue, kind of like anime-ish. Could look black, could look navy. Very Midnight Sky. It's grown-ass adult, but is immature in a lot of ways. I filled in some details about that later. This is not the first character document, but suffice it to say, she's a bit of a sheltered noble. Maybe I should get into that. Like I'm going off on original character work, and I'm trying to fill in certain things about it after the fact. I know I'm going all over the place, but remember, these are for me. I'm never going to rewatch these, I hope. So this is just for me to hear it and connect what I have on the computer and in my notes. And let's be real, I'm not really using the electric typer to do anything but like slow down my drafting, which is fine. Just let's be honest about it. Like it's there for the occasional thing. It's not there because I use it as a primary. One of my many faults is that I live in the 21st century and all of my stuff is badly disposable in a lot of ways. To put it in perspective, I'm working with a 2021 laptop, which I replaced at the time, 11-year-old desktop PC with, that I built myself in college. It was a whole thing. Very proud. It was middling at best. It was like low to mid-range parts for the time. And it ran Windows 7. It was beautiful. Back before Windows started to suck basically with every iteration. Thanks ads. Thanks Web 3.0. But yeah, it's not even just my modern tech is very disposable. This was my grandfather's typer. Pretty sure it was my mother's father, but that's a little muddled. He had it and gave it to me, but I'm not entirely sure if it was his. Regardless. And took it home and I plugged it in. And it kind of worked. The ribbon and the correction ribbon were pretty old, so they showed up on the page and they kind of worked, but not really. As soon as I bought a new ribbon and put it in, like, it worked perfectly. I was working on Home Companion. I wanted to slow down and actually centered that pretty well. So it's pretty well centered, the title. But yeah, I use it to slow down and kind of go through each line, because if I make mistakes, they're almost impossible to correct without basically starting the page over. In fact, there's a line, like 6 lines down, where it looks like I spelled half H-A-F-F and then went back and used the correction ribbon to try and erase the F and put the L where it should be. But you can tell. Like, it's... From context, if you were just reading it through, you wouldn't be able to... You probably wouldn't notice, but I'm looking at it and going... but yeah, I use it to slow down and actually think about what's being written. Can it be spoken easily? Would it lend itself to being read aloud before a crowd? In fact, I think I rewrote the first line a couple of times. I don't like the rewrite. I'll probably go back to how it was before. But regardless, this worked when it probably hadn't been plugged in for the better part of a decade, if not 2. Or maybe it hadn't been even so much as glanced at since before I was born. And I plugged it in, and it worked completely in line with how its written user manual says it should operate. Every time that I changed a setting and saved it according to the directions, it functioned that same way every time. It has a little bit of memory that's power dependent, so every time I unplug it, it kills the memory, which is kind of annoying, but I literally have the directions to fix that every time I have to, so there it is. Whereas the laptop I'm doing this on, if I treat it well and I keep it cool and I occasionally clean it out and put new thermal paste and thermal pads on it, it might last a decade, 15 years, by which time the software will be super out of date, but that's beside the point. Software is software. We have a largely disposable economy in America. I can't speak for the rest of the world. I hope that they're doing better than we are. You can talk prosperity all you want, but at the end of the day, this machine, which is a relatively costly, it was like $1,200, general purpose computer, was already obsolete the year I bought it. Because all of a sudden everybody went from, oh, you have to have at least a 2060 graphics card and 16 gigs of RAM and so much storage space. Now all anyone cares about is AI nonsense. See, I'm self-censoring now. These are for me, but maybe it's good not to tell people they're fucking bullshit morons all the time, and it's healthy for you not to think that way. I don't know. But there it is. Anyway, this old stuff functions when it's sat in a garage. This, if I were to put it in a box and store it in a garage for 30 years, I would open it up and it might boot, it might not. The thermal paste on the processor and on the chipset will definitely be dry and crusty, and the whole thing will overheat within minutes. If at that point some savvy retro tech enthusiast thinks to themselves, let me check how this thing cools itself, assuming that those parts are accessible. I've had it open. I put in a second M.2 to get some extra storage space on it. I keep wanting to add RAM, but it's 16 gigs. Like, it's for the exceptionally light gaming and the video stuff I do on here, it's more than enough. Are they gonna have the documentation? I could include a copy of the maintenance manual. I found it online for this model on this device, but will the media I store it on, assuming I don't just store it on the computer itself, because that is a way to do that if it doesn't turn on, will the media I store it on still be accessible in 30 years? I certainly wouldn't be able to read a floppy drive with anything I have on the floppy drive, a floppy disk, be it a 5 1/4 or a 3 point whatever, the smaller ones. I wouldn't be able to read a floppy disk. I would have to go and buy a floppy disk reader. I know that some modern USB ones are manufactured. I know they're a little pricey because really, who's going to buy them? And realistically speaking, what's on them that anybody would value today? What could you store in, 1.44 megabytes that anybody would value in a tech paradigm where even game developers, people who made it their livelihood to optimize with minimal, with very badly optimized systems. I'm looking at you, PlayStation, and N64, and SNES. But anyway, even when game developers have given up on optimizing their games in anything less than ultra realistic 8K, super high fidelity, whatever, I'm probably in the vocal minority of people who could not give less of a damn if my game looks photorealistic as long as it's fun. Knights of the Old Republic, game that came out in 2004, is still one of the best role-playing games ever made. And by today's standards, it looks like it could run on a potato. And it did run on a potato. It ran on the first Xbox. It can run on a second generation iPad, for God's sake. Like, it was a game that lent itself to immersing yourself into the experience more than its graphical fidelity. I didn't care if the houses on Tatooine or Manaan looked photorealistic. I just cared that they were the right color for the planet you were on. You know, you're not gonna see a sandy sandstone looking building on Manon. You're not gonna see a bluish concrete looking building on Tatooine. It was fine. It played really well. It was a basic like D&D D20 system. And once I got my head around that I don't know how old I was when I first played that. It was like 2005 or 6. It was a couple years after it came out. My brother-in-law had it on Xbox. A system he never seemed to ever play. Like, for someone who owned an Xbox at a time when those were relatively new. And he had a good collection of games, too. He had like 50 games. He never seemed to play the darn thing. I could ask him about that. I probably won't, but I could. It's a text. Yeah, I don't care. Anyway, sorry, I was talking about my book, and then I got off on tech reliability, and so anyway, we'll just jump back a few points. The world in this book is, I guess, series of books, its universe is different than ours. I'm literally reading the document to see if there's any clues as to what I was thinking 14 years ago. And the funny thing is, the so-called main character who I eventually came up with isn't even here. Like, I don't know when the first mention of that character was. Senior project. Okay, it was probably here. Did I date any of this? Anyway, the first time that I explored this particular character was in a creative writing class I was taking. It sounded like fun. I'd never written anything hardly before. I think up to that point I'd written a little fan fiction, and as with everyone who wrote fan fiction in their teens and put it on fanfiction.net, it was all self-indulgent tripe. But yeah, these were in the class. Everyone wrote something once a week. You were expected to write a couple of thousand words. It wasn't much. Like, not for nothing, if you spent a couple of hours genuinely trying to come up with something, you could crap out a couple of thousand words in a few hours. As long as you have a creative bone in your body somewhere, or a creative muscle, or a creative, like chew my nails, but a creative fingernail, you can make things. Creativity is work, but not if you want to make something. That sounded more profound in my head. But yeah, these are marked up. The top comment on this second one is, "Ooh, here we go again." So clearly I had some fans, if only... yeah, this isn't written terribly well. It is marked up well. Okay, sorry, I'm going through it, and one of the comments, because this character visits an early Martian port. Did I mention I'm a sci-fi writer? I'm not sure what that buzzing is. That's going to drive me nuts. Hold on. I know what that buzzing is. One thing about older tech, it doesn't like being left plugged in, and I don't know what it thought it was doing. Probably just keeping the chip's warm, so it doesn't erase all the memory, but the memory was erased anyway, so I would rather just unplug it than listen to it buzz all night. Anyway, that has a coffee stain on it. Also, mildly coffee addicted. Not coffee, but caffeine. Not this time, though. I'm not sure where that coffee stain came from. Anyway, they're on a Marsport, in a Marsport, and the comment here, because you can go into the city without being searched, no passports, no customs, it's a free port. At least at the time this is set in. It's set in the late 22nd century, so the 2190s to the 2180s. And the comment here is, what, no TSA? With a little happy face. The more I look at this, the more I think it's my assistant who marked this up. Okay, gratuitous, other languages. The comment here is in all caps, I can't, which, to be fair, yes. Blatant Neon Genesis Evangelion reference, which in and of itself, it's actually a 2001: A Space Odyssey reference, but that's the line of progression there. Even the call-outs are very, this is definitely your first time actually writing your story, isn't it? Holographic AI drinking. Is this even possible? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, the main character of this particular story, or the person who's most main character-ish, doesn't even show up until a couple... This might have been more than a year after I started actually making this in my head. And from there, it was off to the races. I didn't exactly abandon the original characters. Like, they're all big parts in their stories. Like, everyone's the main character of their own story, and everyone has, like, I think I have at least one short where each person has their own moment, has their own, like, this is my perspective at different times. But the characters I more fell in love with and wanted to see thrive were a weird mishmash. I initially had this idea that they were all on a starship crew. Not really Star Trek, but more trouble-happy space pirates. In fairness, the pirate story is something else that somebody else and I were working on, but that's for another time. I don't know when or where the first instance of the starship Gardeston comes up, but I think I got to that particular word or pronunciation by basically way of Google Translate. If memory serves, and I'm going back at least 10 years, probably more. I don't even see it anywhere in these papers, but I'm kind of skimming through just looking for... Oh, right, I remember the timeline for this used to be very fanficky. Like, there were some very quiet references in the backstory of things that happen in, like, anime and TV shows and shit that would have been great as long as I never brought them to light. There's at least a dozen different... Anyway, I might actually use this in like a more derivative fanfiction story at some point if I really want to. But it's here. It's here for if I ever want to do that. Some bad poetry. Well, I say bad, but it's probably bad. Um, oh right. And at the end of that workshop, actually it wasn't that workshop. It was the one my last year's. I actually kept going with this to try and hone in my style, which I think I did. I don't think my style has changed. I think just my research methods have changed since then. Um, Mark, who's running the, is it wrong that I can't remember his last name because the English department was very big on first name basis. Even professors who had two doctorates were like, no, 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 call me by my first name. I have a name. And at 20, it's a little awkward to tell somebody who's at least twice, if not more, your age, to call them by their name. I don't know if that's just because I'm the awkward one or if that's everyone. But anyway, so I was just kind of glancing over this list, and it's a list of reading suggestions that he gave to everyone. So it's literally everybody's reading suggestions. And I think it's kind of funny that of all of these, he calls everyone by name except me. For some reason, I was the consular, and I don't think either of us ever figured out why that happened. Like it was a the. I had a the in front of a pseudonym, and I asked him about it, and I don't think he had an answer for me. Anyway, moving on. Anyway, the starship Gardiston went through. That had to be traced. Went from I think French for the word guardian, and I Google translated it into Esperanto, and then crapped whatever came out of that out phonetically, and I landed on Gardiston because their ship is their guardian. Not all of this is that story. Some of it is just art projects that I never got around to making. Some of it is handwritten, and my handwriting is atrocious. That's why I type everything. But yeah, they're all these. They're not even terribly misfits. They're just people with stories to tell on this ship. Anyway. Just going down the character list for that particular story. Well, setting aside all of the initial characters, Fairy Blue, I mentioned. I don't know, she was the first character that I invented for this, and she's kind of all the cool things all at once. How do I describe Fairy Blue? I'm literally just looking at her dossier and trying to summarize it. But first off, it's a code name. Obviously, she has a family name. Renette Blue Lafay Lambert. I'll just read what's. Oh, well, here I have a handy dandy summary. Fairy Blue is sort of codename she uses when traveling abroad because Lambert draws too much attention for their political and scientific ambition and work in the British Isles. The family's Welsh or French or something. It's a little vague because the setting of the world is this like post World War stagnation almost. There was a pretty nasty World War in the middle of the 21st century. Before that, the biggest war that happened was the Great War, was World War One. But I decided, okay, let's play fast and loose with believability, and assume that rational minds came to the table at the end of that war for the Treaty of Versailles, and that there wasn't the kind of vindictive attitude toward the apparent losers of that war that there was in our world. I'm actually stealing this concept a little from a friend of mine who has told this story a couple of times. The details never change, but I always muddle stuff. So if he ever decides to correct me, we'll take his version. But the way that I remember he tells it is that he was doing like model UN or model political science thing in high school. For whatever reason, he was assigned Germany for the post-war treaty talks, and he came loaded for bear. He made a convincing enough argument that he essentially avoided war reparations and accepting fault and demilitarization, and the end result was a Germany, a post Great War Germany that worked with its European neighbors toward building a better Europe, as opposed to against its European neighbors, resulting in the atrocities of the Second World War. So yeah, I just kind of ran with that. Actually, I'm just gonna scroll back up and see if I can find anything here on that. I don't actually have it written down, which is weird. Actually, I'm just gonna add this real quick. The world is a much kinder place for a lack of certain notable instances of cruelty spread across the world in my timeline. So basically, for whatever reason, the people in this world are just a smidge less cruel, less vindictive. And that leads to not zero negative outcomes, because conflict is just a fact of nature. Or at least that's how it sometimes appears. Don't hold me to that particular sentiment. It doesn't erase every wrong that will ever be done. People being slightly nicer, slightly less cruel, slightly less vindictive to their defeated foes. But I think that people being just a smidge more interested in reconciliation and in cooperation leads to interesting story work. But yeah, it's a world where we were a little bit less awful to our enemies, the winners to the people they defeated, and it was a largely bloodless remainder of the century and a good chunk of the 21st. I haven't really gone into how this mid 21st century war came to occur. The only person who is a character who is there is James Oliver Smith. I'm already going down the list. We'll jump back to other characters in a minute, but he was there. Um, Suffice it to say, he's one of the more fun characters I've had to work with. So at first, um, how do I even describe how this? Okay, so I'm a science fiction fan, and I have a few favorites, and it's not a surprise that my favorites are usually Heinlein or Asimov novels. I was never as big in Asimov, but I think that you can see some of, if not his influence, then his themes at play in later with different characters. Um, but in fact, I'm trying to. Where are those books? I'm staring right at them because I'm stupid. Um, but it should be no surprise that I'm a Robert Heinlein fan. And aside from certain problematic things with Heinlein's work, um, partly because of when the man was writing, and partly from the the way that it reflects on general America of his time, it's not pretty. Um, my own writing glosses over some of those shortcomings, and I play with the themes more than his perspective on the world. I don't think I have any characters who are outright what we would call today misogynists or racists, because I don't explore those themes. I feel like those have been done to death. I don't have the wherewithal to explore them. Um, do I have the right to explore them? Probably. But do I have the will? Um, Probably not. But what I've largely been doing, aside from being clear about what I'm not doing, which is not exploring um, race or sex issues. Um, I've been playing with this James Oliver Smith character who is immortal. He will not die. He will never ever die. It's perfect regenerative immortality. The only thing that will probably kill him, and I haven't gotten there yet, is the end of the universe. And even then, I'm not sure he'd die. He would just be in stasis, essentially, until the next universe starts, assuming that that's how this world works. I mean, in a paradigm where the universe starts, it expands, and then contrasts in a heat death, but in a big crunch, as opposed to a heat death, which would just be entropy reaching 100% anyway. Would he just be reduced to something that exists in whatever mass energy is left, and then released into the next universe to awaken whenever the conditions for his particular life are reached somewhere? Um, would he die at the end of the universe? Message. Would he die at the end of the universe and be reduced to whatever core piece of mass energy makes him makes him himself and immortal and forever? And would that piece of material wake up one day having reached the surface of a newly formed planet where just enough oxygen is in the air for him to come back? I haven't explored that because that's a long time to try to explore ideas like that, and his stories are long enough as it is. I've got a solid 500 years of his history here, and a lot of it is filled in, and a lot of it has stories to be written about. And a lot of it leads me back around through the background because he's born. He was there at when this nuclear war started. In let me just go down the timeline. In 2036, that would make him. It's no surprise that I made him my age. It would make him 44. Because again, all the characters here are me to some extent. Smith is an idealized version who will supposedly never be able to lose what's important to him as long as he holds on to it, which has been something of a recurring theme in my life. Let's not get into that. No, he's for me. Suffice it to say, he's a person whose character arc thrives on being able to cling to the things and people he loves for as long as humanly possible, because he knows that he will keep going when they no longer can. In fact, I'm going to steal a line from Shinji in Warhammer 40k for this one. As long as I remember them, they're immortal, and as long as they remember me, I'm immortal. And in that particular story, things are weird, and metaphysics has actual meaning. It's not just hyperbole and nonsense. But the idea that even the ghosts of your dead friends will stick around if you remember them, and that as long as those ghosts remember you, you'll stick around. It's this self-fulfilling Ouroboros of maintaining your individuality in a world that may have forgotten about you, except for one small part of it. But that's arguably Smith in a nutshell. Why is he Smith? It's actually kind of a joke. First and foremost, he needed a name. So I picked something that wasn't John Smith. I went James Smith. And I thought, man needs a middle name. All the best sounding characters have middle names. So James Oliver Smith. And then when I started filling in his backstory, it's a little vague, but his given name at birth was Demetrius. And he was born into a cult in America somewhere. I'm a little vague on it because I just haven't done enough research on essentially suicide cults. I'm generalizing, but the kinds of pseudo-religious fanaticism that leads people to kill themselves as part of a group for some greater purpose, you can tell I respect them. But yeah, that's his origin. He was born into one of these cults. Ostensibly, the leaders of the cult were building up the means of stealing eternal life from some force they believed in. Again, a little bit vague about it because this world it's a science fiction book, but there's magic and there's a bit of fantasy to it. There's enough of the unknown that there's always something new to learn. Like, this is something that is probably only ever going to be seen either as backstory or through the lens of science. But to be clear, this was something supernatural. This was something that the natural world did not and should not account for. The source of Smith's immortality. It's possible that his parents and their followers didn't understand it any more than I do. And in fact, it's exactly possible they don't understand it any more than I do, because I don't understand it. But suffice to say, that the plan for them was to sacrifice literal children for this blood sacrifice ritual thing to get eternal life. and whatever popped out when they did it was basically had a will of its own and went no. And the only person to get that immortal life was Demetrius, was who would later be James Oliver Smith. Whether or not it's because of his actions leading up to that is kind of up in the air. One of his first, when I say positive actions, I don't mean that it was a good action. I mean that it was an action that he took through his own choices. He was very young at this point. Was to basically go around slaughtering everyone in town. All the people who were members of this cult, who were gonna kill him and all the people in his generation for this ridiculous nonsense that was eternal life. And basically doing that, he accidentals his way into it. The joke is a piece of sarcastic dialogue from Fallout 4, when the sole survivor finds the Vault-Tec rep, who never gets a name, by the way. That's troublesome in a story that otherwise almost everyone gets a name. He's just the Vault-Tec rep. Let's call him Bob. When he meets Bob for the second time later in the game, you can talk at him sarcastically and go, when he asks you, how are you still alive and looking human? Because regardless, and you can say to him, "Oh, if when you kill enough things, you become immortal." And it's taken as a joke. It's meant as a joke, but that's kind of what happens to Demetrius here. He kills enough people, and he becomes immortal. It's more complicated than that, but that's sort of where he's at. I mean, that at that point, the remaining children, 30-something of them, scatter all over the American Midwest and southern Canada, and they all disappear largely into their own lives. I don't really have dossiers on all of them, but some are picked up by Child Protective Services, others are arrested and put into the system, some go off on their own. I don't know what happened to all of them. I don't know what happened to hardly any of them. There's a scene I had written at some point where he goes back, where Demetrius goes back like 50 odd years later and checks in on the few he kept track of. And for the most part, they're doing well. I think one of them is like he's sitting on a park bench watching, and he's watching someone he considered a friend when he was very small play with his grandkids. And it's this very poignant moment where he looks and he's very happy that his friend got to have a life, and he's stuck in his mid-20s. Why? It's story convenience. Let's be real. The mid-20s is a good place for his character to be, because he can always be in his prime and a useful part of any story he's in for that reason. It's story convenience. You could fill it in and say that whatever thing that had some level of sentience that gave him this immortality had a sense of ethics, a sense of humor, a sense of this would be the right time for him to stop aging, as opposed to I can't remember her name from Interview with the Vampire, who stopped aging when she was turned at like 10. And we handily avoid the immortal child thing, which is always going to be a little bit uncomfortable for a number of reasons. I can tell my wellness app. I drank some water. But yeah, that's not a storyline I want to explore. Like, there's other things I want to explore that isn't the immortal child. Like, it's a trope. It's there. I don't have enough interest in it to play with it. But yeah, so he goes off and come 2005 or 2006, he's off on his own. He's a homeless, penniless teenager in North America. And then we kind of lose track of him for a while. I actually, it's because I don't have any notes on him until he shows up in the opening battle of the next World War in 2036. So at this point, it's a world that doesn't have nuclear weapons or nuclear energy. They're a little worse off as far as the climate crisis goes because they didn't have they didn't have the big juggernaut alternative that was nuclear energy. It's another tangent for me to go off on, but I'll try to be quick about it. Our world should be using more nuclear as an intermediary between coal, oil, and whatever future technology we come up with to have electricity but do so cleanly. Whether that's a derivative of wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, whatever, or something new I can't even imagine. If we were to use our world's fissionable material reserves only on electricity generation, and we stopped using coal and oil, we would be in a better place in 500 years. I think that our civilization would still be here in 500 years. Because we would have, as a whole, decided that the planet we live on is worth preserving, more or less as is, while still using materials that we have to get to a point where we can continue to have the luxuries we do, the electric lights, the computers, the internet, even AI tripod that uses too much electricity. We can continue to have all those things in a world where we're not constantly poisoning ourselves and killing more than 100,000 people a year from health complications having to do with poisoning the atmosphere. Kyle Hill did a series of excellent videos, and I think still does some occasionally, to cover more minutia about essentially how nuclear is actually safe, you guys, and put down your pitchforks. Every fear you have about nuclear is almost definitely the result of some kind of propaganda from gas and oil magnates who are happy to continue making money at your expense, at the expense of the entire world if need be. But that's where I'm at. That's where I'm coming from with this. The world in my book is a little worse off because they haven't cracked nuclear yet. There was no need to. There was no Manhattan Project. There was no bomb research, at least publicly. But 2036 changes that. There was a growing conflict throughout essentially what would be now up until the outbreak of hostilities. It had been a decade and a half of brush fire conflicts and wet firecrackers, to steal another Heinleinism, until somebody, and I'm not sure if it was American or Russian or whatever, unleashed a new super bomb that was used on the massing infantry on one side or the other of this conflict. It killed everyone there, so I don't think that even they knew just how bad their new bomb was going to be. I'm not talking about like a little boy or a fat man. I'm talking they somehow quietly put together not quite a modern to our expectations of a modern atomic bomb, but something very nasty um, that essentially blew up Lake Baikal. um, Made it deeper and made a second one, maybe. Um, Suffice it to say, um, James is killed in that battle, having joined the American military as a way of escaping pretty much the problems that come with being a teenage runaway. Lack of funds, lack of housing, and he had been hiding just how young he looks for a long time at that point. He's 44 and he hasn't aged in almost 20 years. And he's doing okay, but he's part of the infantry, and he was killed when the bomb hit. He wasn't in the nasty part, the part where you just turn into literal shadows on concrete. But he was close enough that the radiation got him, and his weapons were melting. And from that point on, he knows. Like, up until that point, he hadn't been killed. He just thought he was unnaturally youthful looking. He didn't know. Which is... It either says a lot or a little about him that he never thought about it. Suffice it to say, he... Actually, I have some details here. James Smith, 44, is killed in battle but wakes up to see the mushroom cloud, something that, in this world at least, had only been described in such accidents as, was it RAF Depot Fell? It's in RAF Depot that had blown up, I think, in the Second World War. I think that the fairest thing to say about it was that there was a war going on. Somebody might have dropped something, or a spark might have caught something, and the whole depository just blew up. All the bombs, all the gunpowder, everything that could explode did. And what was described by people far enough away to see it was a black mushroom-shaped cloud. So up until then, or up until here, that's the only sort of thing that people would know that big explosions do. For whatever reason, and I don't remember off the top of my head why this happens, but it has something to do with superheated air and dust. It's just the way that cool air comes in and does like this in all directions, and it makes a cloud that looks like that. But he's close enough to see it, and close enough to still be feeling the radiation, but he doesn't know anything about that because he's not exactly the most educated person at this point. Again, teenage runaway with limited access to information until he was an adult, now trying to teach himself everything. Like, he had to get into the officer academy, because by then he was a low-ranked officer. He had to basically teach himself mathematics. How do you do mathematics when you're starting from barely knowing arithmetic? But regardless, I don't really cover it. Some of the detail work that I would probably borrow from would be stealing directly from Heinlein, who was a Navy man who wrote about it in his science fiction books. It's a whole thing. But yeah, so he sees the mushroom cloud. He's running away from it because he doesn't know any better. He gets caked in the murderous black rain that happens, that occurs after it, but he washes it away somewhere between there and Mongolia. There's probably some body of water that isn't contaminated that he can happily contaminate along the way. Moves east through China, sneaks his way onto a civilian cargo ship at Vladivostok going east, and he winds up in America under a new name. there's a note here that says not Russian because he obviously isn't, given how bad his spoken Russian is. And he basically, on his trip back on this cargo ship, wins enough money at playing poker and cards to bribe his way into new papers as a British immigrant. Essentially, he claims that he's running from the conflict and came this direction because it was safer than trying to go across the Atlantic. So he goes across the Pacific. And in Los Angeles, they basically go, "How much money did you give? Oh yeah, here's your new papers. Enjoy." And by then, he's already using James Smith as his name. He doesn't even bother giving Demetrius anymore, and goes from there. That war goes on for 20 years. It's pretty nasty. Atomic weapons got thrown around a little. Like, there's cities that are going to be uninhabitable for decades because of how dirty some of these bombs were. They were not well made. They did more radiation damage than fire damage, some of them. Bio weapons were used, resulting in some very nasty contamination in fresh water sources. I don't really have a list on which ones, but part of Fairy Blue's story is that her family was responsible for a lot of the early cleanup operations because it was one of the few that made it through that war with some amount of money intact. New nobility starts to rise at this point because if your world hasn't been damaged quite like ours has by capitalism, and this happens, I feel like you fall back into like pseudo-feudalism at this point. And like I said, the world is full of people who are a little nicer than in ours, so it's the sorts of people who would use their power wisely. It's a bit of wishful thinking on my part, but a lot of it's backstory, so I'm allowed to have a little wishful thinking. Yeah, the war was nasty. I don't have any notes here on James popping back up. Excuse me. The sun is still up and I'm tired. There's not much here about him popping back up until okay, I'm past 2100 at this point. Here we go. 2117, the youngest version of Smith that we've seen in the story thus far, not in these notes, but that's all his backstory. So he basically pops up here at the age of 125, meets Roland Red in our city, which is one of dozens of basically cookie cutter brutalist cities that popped up as part of Reconstruction. I'm not sure, call it phase 3 of post-war Reconstruction. In fact, there's a note here in broad strokes: post-World War Reconstruction, phase 1, immediate emergency stabilization of existing and damaged infrastructure, buildings, and other essential items, food, water, emergency housing, that sort of thing. Just get people to stop dying from things that are preventable. Disease outbreaks, dying of thirst, dying of hunger. Any government still standing basically did these with different levels of success immediately following that war. Phase 2 is new infrastructure, which was laying down the foundations for these standardized cities. I don't think I actually have any notes on it, but basically, I presume some think tank thought up these modern city ideas, and they basically pitched it as, here's the plans free of charge for any government who can still commit to this construction of how to build a relatively self-sufficient new city with what you probably have on hand. And a lot of countries at that point had fallen apart, and we were down to, well, they were down to, not we, doing what they could with what was on hand. Like, you would have work crews tearing down old, desiccated buildings that were barely just concrete and steel, and recycle and grind up the old materials to be used for much lower density housing, because that was what was necessary. Phase 3 was high density urban centers. So now that everything is stable, people aren't dying quite as much as they were from after the war. People are generally housed. The world is less of one giant refugee camp and more one giant, like, suburban city, I guess. Then you can start rebuilding high density urban centers, and you can, from that point, phase 4 would be mid density urban and historical restoration, which would be things like, essentially, instead of high rise residential, high to mid rise business, commercial, things that aren't residential. Even manufacturing and food production could be done using this city template in buildings. As for the actual science behind feeding a city of 1 million or more with hydroponics alone, it's speculative science fiction. Like, I feel like it could be done as long as every building was trying its damnedest to feed itself. And everyone was willing to share. Like, the world has kind of moved away from laissez-faire capitalism. It's not, at this point, it's not quite communism. It's not quite a social, it's not quite a socialist society. And let's not conflate the two. If I had to give it a name, if I had to compare it to our own systems, it would be I don't know if there's a word for it, but where everyone co-owns the infrastructure, and people are largely, not perfectly, but largely okay with that being the system, where they all have a share in what they're doing. If you have an apartment and you produce food in your building, you own the apartment, you own part of the food production, and there might be somebody above you telling you how to do it, but that's because they're educated in that, not because they own it, not because they're your boss. The problem with calling it communism is that word has a lot of negative connotations, especially in the Western world. And the concept behind it was perverted by combining what could have been communal ownership under, like, a more, I guess, Marxist, arguably, framework, with an authoritarian, dictatorial political system. So that's like that combination is what most people mean when they say communism. You know, when you talk about the Red Scare and the Soviet Union, that's what people think of: authoritarian regime mixed with top-down ownership, pretending to be Marxism. Arguably, this is Marxism at its finest. I'll grant you. a lot of it behind the scenes is due to like this pseudo feudalism going on with the wealthy families who are not wealthy in money, because money hardly means anything at this point because of how broken the world economy is. Um, they're wealthy in control. The Lamberts. Um, it's not that they were super wealthy after the last World War. It's that they protected enough of their own that those people turned around and said, you know what, you were the leaders at this time. We'll keep doing what you say because you kept us safe during these nasty, crazy years. And they weren't unique in that. There were definitely other families who did a lot worse. The Roberts, for one, were very nasty about it. At least that in their modern interpretation, they started as a French name I can't pronounce, and essentially just like anglicized it when Europe started getting more bland. By the time the war's over, the populations of the world have done one of these and twisted around every which way, so part of that is to do away with any amount of racial discrimination, because it's been done to death. Like, other authors have talked about it. I'm not saying that concept will never show up in this, but I'm saying that it's not something I'm exploring, so I'm not going to. I'm sure some people will have some interesting, probably nasty things to say about that, but write your own book. This is a world where people are just a smidge nicer to each other than in ours. So maybe in this world you didn't write that nasty internet comment. Anyway. But yeah, James shows up here, essentially talked his way into an immigration, into a license to be there, being an American citizen with supposedly British ancestry, as part of the labor force for Phase 4, the mid-density urban and historical restoration. And he's working for this organization called the Anderson Foundation, which isn't necessarily the think tank that thought up the sustainable cities, but I'm not saying it's not. The current head of which is Fastow Alexander Anderson. And yes, that's a reference. I don't think I ever say his middle name in the story, so just this might be the only place where I ever admit that his name started as a reference. If you don't know, it's Hellsing, the character Alexander Anderson in Hellsing. I'm not sure where Fastow came from. Fastow, Fastow. It just sounded good, and I ran with it. But yes, Smith is there. He's working at basically the bottom. And he meets Roland Red, who has a complicated story in and of himself. He's in town. He's the son of... It's not a surprise. He's the son of the Roberts family. One of them, anyway. It's complicated. And he's there to fuck around and find out. It's more to do with what happens later in the story. I'm not trying to be coy about it. It's just, it would be another tangent to get off on, and we'd be stepping away from Smith right now, because that's who we're talking about. Something time travel, something aliens, something alternate timelines. Just roll with me here. But yeah, the two of them meet, and Smith, who arguably hasn't trusted anyone in half a century, kind of sits back and goes, this guy's selling me on something good. Because Roland is... Okay, so we're getting into Roland a little bit after all. I keep having to remind myself, these are all me. Roland never hesitates. Always takes the big bite. Always takes the last piece of sushi. Always has a decision. What for good or for bad, he makes a decision. And then he lives with the consequences, for good or bad. So he's that aspect of me who wants to be able to make and stick to a decision, for better or worse. But to that end, Smith buys what he's selling. Smith decides someone who talks to me like he's the only person in the world with a plan. I want to see what this kid's up to. And remember, Smith is 125. He's looking at this 20-something, this like 21, 22-year-old going, what is this kid doing? What? And he starts to hope. He starts to hope for a future, which is something he'd given up on. I'm kind of skipping past the immortal angst period he has, because his like first century immortal angst is kind of boring. You know, it was a lot of, you know, I'll go see the world, I'll go climb the pyramids, I'll try to avoid this horrible, horrible war that I died in. And he's mostly here not even because he needs the job, because it sounded interesting. You know, he wanted to be part of building the new world infrastructure, even if it is a bunch of concrete buildings that look like they belong in Soviet Russia. At least these are theoretically built a little better than those, because, oh my god, some of those were built... Some were built to last. I will give credit where credit's due. Some of those buildings, I think, are still standing today and are still in use. Others were actual, literal death traps. Anyway. But he's here, like, he's buying into what Roland is saying, and it helps that Roland is a little older than he looks. Extremely long story short, this is not the first time Roland has been in this situation. He's in a time loop of his own. I haven't even mentioned the time loops yet. The Roland of a previous timeline was damn near on the verge of death, and a situation that we haven't gotten to yet means that he was essentially picked up and mental time traveled into the past, where he's now building his networks, his reputation, his support structure before anyone knows that he's going to need it, because he needs it pretty quickly. This is 2117. There is an invasion, aliens, surprise, surprise, in 2119. That's 2 years. The original timeline, he didn't have even a tenth of the resources that he has now to combat this. And they're coming specifically for his little corner of the world, because some MacGuffin that's never adequately explained is essentially buried right under the city. They can't just shoot at it, but they also refuse to leave without it. There's a lot of moving parts here, but suffice it to say, it's Roland and his network, which includes this 125-year-old James Smith, because he's working with a version that's considerably older to have gotten here in the first place. That other version, that much older version of Smith that's running around, has been running around doing his own thing this whole time, which we'll get to further down in Smith's history. Because at this point, again, he's only 125. He's got a few more centuries in him of bullshit happening to him. I've been going at this for an hour and a half. Probably best to call it. I'm just going to jot down where I'm at in terms of this, just so I can pick back up another time. It's nice getting this out. It's less, I want you to hear this, dear imaginary video viewer, and more, it's nice to get this flowing in my head, because again, this is more than a decade in the works. This is hundreds of pages of notes and documents, and it's just nice to get it flowing. So when I go to sit down and actually do some bloody writing for a change, I have an idea in mind instead of it just being off the cuff. So okay, we left off in 2117 with Smith at the age of 125. Until next time.